This is the story of the most dangerous landing procedure in commercial aviation, a maneuver so unsettling to passengers that it earned its own nickname, the Kai Tak Heart Attack. Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport operated for 73 years on a single runway sticking out into Victoria Harbour, with mountains on one side and some of the most tightly packed neighbourhoods on Earth pressed against the other. Pilots landing there had to aim directly at a mountainside, find an orange and white checkerboard painted on a hill, and then crank the aircraft into a 47-degree turn at 650 feet, flying between apartment buildings at rooftop level while residents below looked straight up and locked eyes with passengers staring back. During its peak year in 1996, 29.5 million passengers moved through this airport on that single runway. That made it the third busiest in the world for international travelers and number one globally for international cargo. Kai Tak started as a real estate deal that went sideways. Around 1912, two businessmen named Sir Ho Kai and Ao Tak formed a company to reclaim land from Kowloon Bay for a housing development called the Kai Tak Bund. Their venture collapsed, and the colonial government purchased the land in 1927. What the government inherited was a flat open patch of ground, and that turned out to be all early aviation required. An American pilot named Harry Abbott had already set up a flying school on the site in 1924, and the first recorded flight lifted off on January 25th, 1925. A control tower went up in 1935. The first scheduled commercial flight arrived from Penang in March 1936, and Cathay Pacific chose Kai Tak as its hub when the airline was founded in 1946. But here's the thing that defined this airport forever. By the time jet aircraft arrived, Hong Kong had grown so completely around the runway that the only direction left to expand was into the sea. A government master plan in 1954 called for building a new runway as a promontory extending directly into Kowloon Bay, completed in 1958 and eventually stretched to 3,390 meters by 1974. Pan Am brought the first Boeing 747 on April 11, 1970, and by the 1990s, over 70 airlines flew into this single strip of concrete, averaging 36 aircraft movements per hour at peak times. The problem was straightforward. Mountains northeast of the airport blocked any normal, straight-in instrument approach to runway 13, and no amount of engineering could move them. Engineers answered in 1974 by installing an instrument guidance system, or IGS, a modified landing system with one dramatic twist. Rather than pointing the localizer beam straight down the runway at heading 135 degrees, they offset it by 47 degrees to heading 088 almost due east, aimed squarely at a hillside. Walking through the approach from a pilot's seat reveals why it earned its reputation. Everything began southwest of the airport at a minimum of 6,000 feet, where the pilot intercepted the localizer heading east. From there, the aircraft descended on a 3.1-degree glide slope toward the mountains, with autopilot typically switched off at around 2,500 feet, because from that point on, every input came from human hands. Passing the outer marker at 4.8 nautical miles, the altimeter read about 1,750 feet. Descent continued to the middle marker at 2.2 nautical miles, where altitude dropped to roughly 650 feet. And this is where the Jeppesen approach chart carried a warning printed in bold. Continued flight on the IGS flight path after passing the middle marker will result in loss of terrain clearance. That means if you keep flying straight, you hit the mountain. At that moment, 650 feet up and closing on high terrain, the pilot had to spot the checkerboard, a large orange and white pattern painted on the south face of a 98-meter hill. Spotting it meant initiating a 47-degree right-hand visual turn with no instrument guidance whatsoever. Missing it meant going around immediately. Captain Bill Travis, a former Pan Am 747 captain, described the rule as absolute. If you reach that point without seeing the checkerboard, you went around with zero hesitation. Aircraft entered the turn at about 650 feet and came out at roughly 140 feet, just 43 meters above the ground, lower than many surrounding apartment buildings. Once the turn was complete, the aircraft flew over Kowloon City at rooftop height before touching down. Passengers on the right side could peer into people's living rooms, and one first-hand account describes seeing laundry on clotheslines, children playing, and faces turned upward with features easily distinguishable. Captain Jeff McInnes from Qantas recalled flying close enough that people's washing looked like it might catch on the wingtip. Down in Kowloon City, 36 flights per hour meant the roar of engines was the soundtrack of daily life. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when aircraft passed. Waiters in tea restaurants paused until the noise faded, and laundry was occasionally torn from balconies. Directly under the flight path sat the infamous Kowloon Walled City, where airport height restrictions forced construction to compress rather than climb, creating that bizarre hive of interconnected structures where rooftops doubled as playgrounds and front row seats for watching aircraft. Despite all of that, many residents developed genuine affection for the airport, spending weekends watching takeoffs and turning the Kai Tak car park rooftop into one of the world's best plane spotting locations. The safety record held up better than the reputation might suggest, mostly because airlines assigned only their most experienced captains to Hong Kong, and every pilot needed simulator certification before attempting the approach with passengers. Even so, roughly 12 major air disasters struck Kai Tak over its history, claiming around 270 lives. The deadliest occurred on August 24, 1965. When a U.S. Marine Corps KC-130F Hercules carrying 71 people lost an engine during takeoff, struck the seawall, and crashed into Kowloon Bay, killing 59. The most famous incident happened on November 4th, 1993, when China Airlines Flight 605 attempted to land during Tropical Storm Ira with gusts hitting 38 knots. A British Airways pilot had turned down the same approach just 13 minutes earlier. The 5-month-old Boeing 747-400 overran the runway and ended up nose first in Victoria Harbor, becoming the first 747-400 ever written off, though all 296 people on board survived. Captain Dave Newbury from Cathay Pacific shared his own close call, describing a moment halfway through the turn when a sudden rainstorm wiped out all visibility at 140 feet. He had to execute a missed approach from inside a banked turn, which he described simply as quite hard work. By 1996, Kai Tak had been overwhelmed beyond any fix. Its 29.5 million passengers exceeded the airport's design capacity of 24 million by more than 5 million, and a single runway with a night curfew and the most demanding approach in commercial aviation made replacement unavoidable. The new airport at Chek Lap Kok, part of a $20 billion infrastructure program, had been announced back in the October 1989. Everything ended on the night of July 5th, 1998. Dragonair Flight A841 from Chongqing landed at 23:38 as the last arrival, and a Cathay Pacific A340-300 ferry flight lifted off at 1:05 on July 6th as the very last departure. Captain Kim Sharman piloted that final flight, a man who had landed at Kai Tak approximately 4,000 times. At roughly 1:16 in the morning, Richard Siegel, the director of civil aviation, spoke the airport's last words before switching off the runway lights. Goodbye, Kai Tak, and thank you. Today, a 50,000-seat sports park occupies part of the former site, already named one of Time's world's greatest places after opening in March 2025. A cruise terminal designed by Foster and Partners sits where the runway once ended. The checkerboard itself faded under vegetation for years after closure until the Hong Kong government restored it in 2020 and 2021, repainting it in its original orange and white colors as an official monument. No instruments guide anyone through a turn over Kowloon City anymore. Captain Dave Newbury summed up the whole experience in 5 words: Kai Tak was special. Nothing like it existed before, and nothing like it will exist again.